Hey there. Stay tuned after the podcast for an important announcement on a free bonus episode coming up this week. Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Freedom from the Struggle podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Corelli. Right now, we're on season 2, episode 2, and I'm going to entitle this episode The Interview with Macy. However, I have to be honest with you. Speaking with Macy this week, it was determined that she is just too shy to have her voice on recording. So she has given me permission to go ahead and relay her story in interview fashion, but definitely you won't be hearing her voice today. I think this is a very important episode for all of my listeners to hear, as well as something you'd want to share with your friends and family. There's going to be a whole lot of information in here. And I've made a decision to kind of cover a lot of bases that I have previously said I was going to shy away from. Just by nature of the interview, it came to pass that these are the answers that Macy needed at this point in her life, in her struggle. And so I can't help Macy and give her this information and not include it in the podcast. Therefore, you're going to hear a lot of the things that you've heard me say in season 1 that I probably wouldn't get too far or too deep into. We're going to actually dig into it during this episode. So buckle up and get ready for that. Number 2, I want to remind you that season 2 of this podcast and going forward, we're going to do our best to try to help people practically who are struggling with demonic attack or spiritual warfare. And therefore, we are looking for people who would be willing to share their story. Like episode 1 of season 2, we did an interview with Ray. And in this episode, we're interviewing Macy, even though she's not going to be on the air. So we can do it with you on the air or literally by me just relaying the message and maybe even reading. So there's a lot of ways that you can reach out for help that don't require you being a guest on a podcast, but still get the help you need. If you are somebody who is interested in looking at the help that we provide here or just need resources to get the help that you need, please reach out to us at Anthony at thestruggleseries.com. That's Anthony, common spelling, at thestruggleseries.com. As I always promise, our team will read through every single one of those emails and try to get you the help that you need. So without further ado, let's get into episode 2 of season 2 entitled Interview with Macy. Now, I want to address the fact that Macy couldn't or didn't feel that she could participate in this podcast for a couple of different reasons. First of all, she's just very, very shy. And speaking with her via email and then via telephone, it was very clear that she's somebody who is just not comfortable hearing her own voice. But there's a second portion of this, and I think that ties into maybe the story that we need to tell in terms of Macy's struggle. Macy is the daughter of a preacher. Her father was a preacher who, in his ministry, and although he is deceased, was very vocal about the fact that there was no literal demons existing nowadays and that deliverance ministers or people who spoke of demons were simply charlatans or were trying to gain attention by using stories that came from the time of the apostles. And so she was somebody who absolutely positively grew up believing that demons weren't real and that people were simply evil from original sin and that all of her struggles were her own fault. And so my conversation with Macy started out with just some basic questions like, why do I think demons are the Nephalim? And why do demons hate us? And so my initial interactions, and as my team was actually responding to these emails, were along the lines of I was just going to ask a couple or answer a couple of questions and then move on to the next person. However, from these interactions, it became clear that Macy had actually been through deliverance ministry in her life. And yet she still struggles with why this even happened to her. And so Macy is somebody who has been delivered from demonic attack. However, she still has questions and is still carries some fears that this could return. And so somehow, some way, from a friend of a friend of a friend, she found this little tiny podcast that I'm trying to grow and listened to a couple of episodes. And of course, the first episode that she listened to was the episode in season 1 entitled Ancient Aliens. And for some reason, that caught her attention and caused her to reach out. And so, what I want to do is take us down a path that gets in detail as to why I believe what I believe and why this is important to not only Macy's question, but maybe to anybody who is struggling with paranormal activity, spiritual warfare, demonic attack in their lives. It's not just important to know that this is happening to you or what is happening to you, but the why may be the biggest portion of the question that you're asking. And so, again, as I said in the intro, I'm going to cover a lot of bases today that I covered with Macy, and it will take us down a deep path. Most of you will think I'm crazy at the beginning. Most of you think I'm crazy anyway, but most of you will think I'm crazy in the beginning. But what you're going to find is this is not something that hasn't been researched by me and many others. And more importantly, it may help you put pieces of the puzzle together that you simply have never considered. So I'm going to kind of make a statement to start out with that maybe will put us in the right mindset. And I believe that this is true for myself as well as probably countless other Christians, if not most other Christians. And that statement is we need to do a whole lot more Bible and a whole lot less church. And why do I say that? Because there are so many things that are abnormal when you read the Bible in comparison to what you've learned or what you've heard at church. And that is going to be important to understanding what spiritual warfare is all about. To be honest, most pastors or most preachers will not preach this from the pulpit. If you come from a Catholic background, this will definitely not be preached from the pulpit. And if you claim paranormal activity or exorcism is needed, there's a big process that comes from the higher ups of this denomination, of this church. So it is definitely not something that we hear in the mainstream day-to-days of most denominations, including Catholicism. It's kind of a fringe topic. However, when you truly read the Bible, there are so many things that do not make sense that will make sense if you simply choose to pay attention. And when it comes to the paranormal, to demons, I would say that the Bible has a whole lot more to say than what you think it does. And so, what I want to do is I'm going to take us down a deep, dark, abnormal path to look at scriptures to get you to understand why I believe what I believe, which I also believe is important to helping people who are struggling with demons. So I believe, to recap, that demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephalim, which were a group of giants that roamed the earth. And we first hear about them in Genesis chapter 6, that are children of fallen angels and human women. Now, what I'm going to do is start us out in 1 Corinthians 11, 3 through 15. not the place you thought I was going to take you, but I want you to hear this because I want to shock you. I want to change your paradigm, to use a psychological term. I basically want to challenge your belief systems. And it says this in 1 Corinthians 3 through 15, and you've heard this passage a million times. 1 Corinthians 11, 3 through 15 says, "But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head. But every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovers dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. For if a wife will not cover her head, then she should cut her hair short. But since it is disgraceful for a wife to cut her hair or shave her head, let her cover her head. For a man ought to not cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. But the woman is the glory of man. For man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created from woman, but woman for man. That is why a wife ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels." And we stop there in verse 10. Why would the writer of Corinthians literally instruct people, women, to cover their heads? Why is there a conversation about shaving a woman's head in the book of 1 Corinthians? And why does it say it's because of the angels? Now, what I want you to put in your mind right now is that is not on accident. And I would imagine those of you who grew up in the church and who have read the scriptures or heard that scripture before, most of you, if you're honest, if not all of you, simply skimmed over that part of the passage because you think you understand what it is saying. And in reality, you do. You understand that God is establishing this hierarchy of God and Jesus and man and woman, but you never really took the time to understand the reasons. And so when it says because of the angels, there was so much meat in that passage and so much to debate or to consider that the part about because of the angels blew by your head. But I'm going to put a little bookmark there and I'm going to take you to Genesis 3:15. It says, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." Now, I'm going to read it again, and I want you to grammatically hear what I said. Take yourself to a garden called Eden, and Adam and Eve have eaten of this forbidden fruit, tempted by a serpent or a snake, and they are now in the midst of understanding the consequences of that. And so hear this grammatically. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Question: who is saying this? I will put enmity between you and the woman. Who is the I? This is God, right? How do you want to view this? This is the disembodied spirit of Jesus talking about how he will bruise your head as you bruise his heel. Do you stop and think that this is a scene in a garden where God, the disembodied spirit of Jesus, the Holy Spirit, whatever part of the Godhead makes you make sense of this passage is having a conversation with the serpent. And basically, what he does is he establishes the seed war, the DNA war, if you will. He's saying that your offspring or your seed and her offspring, there shall be enmity between you. So who are his offspring and who are her offspring? So again, let's put a little bookmark there. So now we fast forward a little bit in Genesis chapter 6, we hear about this group of beings called the Bene Elohim. And this is translated in most translations of the Bible as sons of God. Now, people will argue often and say, well, the sons of God were a certain lineage from Adam, and they will back that up with some level of biblical understanding or at least theory. But the Bene Elohim actually means spiritual being or mighty one. See, I think if we're honest, and again, we need less church and more Bible, we were told, at least I was told from a very early age, even before I was actually a saved Christian, even when I was a Catholic, just learning about God, I was told that the name for God was Elohim. But that's not true. Elohim is a word that means the spiritual being or mighty one. So the more accurate statement would be God is the Elohim of all of the other Elohim, or Elohims if you want to get grammatically ungrammatical. He is the God of gods, the Elohim of Elohim. And so when you understand that these Bene Elohim, these spiritual beings, came down to earth, they had a commission. They had a goal that was established to them by God of what they were here for, but they chose a different path. And so we hear in Genesis 6:4 that in those days there were giants, and then also after those days. So after the flood, there were still giants. And so you can see why I've shied away from this, because it gets so in depth and people get so frustrated, upset, because these topics were never discussed. I've been to seminary, I've been to Bible college. We never discussed this, ever. I've worked in churches. If I would have brought a sermon series to discuss this, boards and committees and elderships and deaconships, church leaderships would have said, we are not touching that subject. Because the narrative is too controversial. But we have to understand that the Bible says these things for a reason. So if we understand that these Bene Elohim had a interaction with these human women that created these giant beings called Nephalim, and that these giants existed before the flood, and DNA was so corrupted before the flood that God had to send the flood to cleanse the earth. But then there were also Elohim, or beings that were half Elohim, half human. Somehow we've never really taken the time to understand, how did that even happen? Was there another group of angels that came down and created a next race of Elohim? Is there rituals that we learned that we were able to alter our DNA? Some certain people were able to alter their DNA and create another race of people. See, we've never put two and two together, because, to be honest with you, we skim over those passages because we didn't really need to know that stuff, did we? I mean, 30 years ago, we needed to know about grace and sin, and all those things are very, very relevant. I'm not saying they're no longer relevant, but now that the world is in the state that it's in, we have to understand more about the enemy than we have in any sort of recent past, even distant past, because we are seeing the manifestations of evil and demons. And the devil's schemes are no longer hidden, but they're in plain sight. So understanding this is vital. And for Macy, as her and I discussed this, she several times broke down in tears because nobody had ever taken the time to just walk her through some basic biblical passages. She doesn't even remember her father ever preaching on Genesis 6 or ever even reading Genesis chapter 6. Now, I worked in full time ministry for a while, and my children would have been considered, pastors' kids, at least my older ones. But I can't remember ever specifically telling them to read Genesis chapter 6. So I'm not beating up her father, but what I'm saying is for somebody who was struggling with demonic attack later in life, nobody took the time to even explain to her who the enemy she was fighting actually was. And so when I was explaining these concepts to her and she broke down, it's because she said nobody had ever taken the time to explain to me that these are not just made up concepts or concepts that a minister is spitting out of his, educated guess, but that somebody was actually explaining to her that biblically you can find answers. Many of you who have listened to my earlier podcasts have heard me talk about the extra canonical book of Enoch, which would explain a whole lot more. There's also a book of giants, the book of Jasher. But for this episode, I've simply chosen to use the Bible so that I'm not accused of adding or subtracting to the Bible. I'm simply taking you to places in the Bible that maybe you did not consider. So during our conversation, Macy said, "So what happened to these beings?" And I said, "Well, my belief is that after the flood, these beings called the Nephalim were cursed to roam the earth as disembodied spirits. But they want a body because they loved their body. They loved that superhumanness that they enjoyed with a body that was part human, part angel. And being spirit beings may or may not limit them in their physicalities, and we can kind of discuss that, in depth, either later in this podcast or as we help other people. But I explained to her that after the flood, we're not really sure, but I can point you to some very good places where we have basically a good knowledge of what may have happened. So I asked her, I said, "Do you have your Bible with you?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Do me a favor and turn to Genesis chapter 10. Now, what I did is I told her of the story of a guy named Nimrod. And when we read about Nimrod, we can learn a whole lot. And so I explained to her that Nimrod, in some translations, they call him a mighty man, a hunter of men. Um, some translations say he was the first mighty man. But what we do know is that Nimrod was, in my opinion, the character known as Gilgamesh in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, it was pretty humorous to her, that so much so that she had to kind of laugh and say, "Wait a minute, this is getting too weird." And I said, "Well, now do you understand why pastors don't talk about this, or they never took the time to learn it? Because the Bible's complicated as it is, and most people didn't think they ever needed this information." But I explained to her, "You've heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh, correct?" And she said, "Well, yes, I have." And I said, "Well, most scholars, and definitely God haters and atheists, believe that the Epic of Gilgamesh is way older in its writing than the actual Bible itself. And therefore, they constantly say that the Bible took its flood narrative from the Epic of Gilgamesh, or Gilgamesh's epic story. But I explained to her that a real simple Google search will tell you, and we could even go to Micah chapter 6, where it says in the Bible that Nimrod was the founder of Assyria. And even Greek mythology named a person called Ninus, which Greek mythology said was Nimrod, was the king of Assyria and the founder of Nineveh. But here's what's crazy. Where was Gilgamesh's tomb found according to archaeology? It was found in Nineveh. So the king of Assyria would have been Gilgamesh, the first king, and that would also, according to not only Greek mythology, but the Bible, says that Nimrod was the founder of Assyria. And I told her, why is this important? Because to understand who Gilgamesh was is to also understand who Nimrod was. Because you remember, we know through the Epic of Gilgamesh that Gilgamesh was a giant, a mighty man. And he, through his journeys, stumbled on a creature called Enkidu, or Enkidu, as some people say. And Enkidu was a beast-like man, and I won't get into the details of their relationship, but let's just say they became very, very close friends. If you've ever read it, you know exactly what I'm saying. But they go out on these adventures to conquer the world, basically, these two giant, I would say, above human creatures. Now, why is this important? Because I'm going to take you to a passage in Genesis chapter 10, starting in verse 8. And I want you to hear this translation because this is the King James translation, and other translations don't always do great with the actual translation from the original language to English. But in the King James, it says, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty man on the earth, one in the earth. Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on the earth to be a mighty man. Cush was also an ancestor of Nimrod, who was the first heroic warrior on earth. So you can understand that he became the first mighty man on the earth in one translation, but in one translation, Cush began to be a mighty man. So the translation, he began to be a mighty man on the earth, insinuates that he was a normal man that somehow began a process to be a mighty man, which then became this hunter on earth. And most scholars would say that meant hunter of people. Now, watch this. The Tower of Babel, we've heard, was this structure that mankind at this time, under the direction of Nimrod, was building up this structure to be a structure that reached up into the heavens. But it didn't take somebody back then to realize that that couldn't have meant that it was going to be so tall that it reached the heavens. But let's just say, for argument, that that's what you would have thought that meant 2,000 years ago, because there weren't structures that were built that high then. But more importantly, they didn't know anything about the atmosphere and the different levels of atmosphere of the earth before you actually went into space. So even somebody without a good understanding of all of that would know that it is impossible to build a structure so tall that it reached the heavens. Now, I've heard people say, well, they didn't know they couldn't get there. But wait a minute. If that was the case, God would have just let them fail. and not come down, wipe out this mess, and scatter them all over the earth, which is where we get the term Babel, because he mixed their languages as he scattered people all over the earth, saying to his heavenly councils, we have to scatter them, because if you keep them all together like this, they start to achieve things that we don't want them to achieve. And I'll let you dig into more of that, because what I'm trying to do is not only teach you, but also teach you to go teach yourself. You see, I believe that the Tower of Babel was an astrological structure. It wasn't actually a building that was so tall that it would reach the heavens. And because this astrological structure is worded as they were trying to reach the heavens, it seems more like that this was a place of worship. And we see that it was probably a pyramid, because we see these temple structures or these pyramid structures all over the earth. And so this pyramid was built to worship Nimrod and to do all of his, I would say, shady rituals on top of or inside of, because he wanted all of the people to worship him as the king and all of his offspring as gods. And remember, if you understand history and you think of all the civilizations, for example, the Egyptians, the Aztecs, the Mayans, these civilizations stated that they were not only kings, but they were god kings. And these god kings could do crazy things like magic. So shown they showed the world that they ruled over that they were different, that they were magical or mystical, but definitely more than human. Maybe that changes how you think of the concept of the story of Moses in Pharaoh's court, where he throws his staff on the ground and turns into a snake. But those in Pharaoh's court, called magicians, were able to also do the same. These was it magic in the sense of sleight of hand of what we consider magic now? Or were these beings somehow altered DNA beings that were able to do miraculous things? See, I think what throws us off is we have our limited mindset of the spirit realm. So we don't believe, for example, that technology could exist outside of our realm. But isn't that an arrogant statement? Because most people may not even believe there is a spirit realm, but those of us that do, we have to be honest and say we don't have a clue of what actually goes on in there. But these were half men, half gods, right? So what technologies did they have? Keep in mind, like the chariots of fire that is spoken about in the Bible, that's technology, right? So, what I want to do is go back to the passage where it says, He began to be a mighty one on the earth. And I want to make sure that I kind of walk you through some understanding of what I mean by translations. Now, I actually read mostly in my life the English Standard Version, but I always try to go to different versions, because it's often curious to find out why the wording was different. But let's just take the King James. Remember that the King James translators were commissioned by King James. And they chose, for example, not to name the classes of angels. So when you read the King James, everything is translated as angels, right? And if you know history, King James hated Catholics and hated the fact that they worshiped saints and idols and what he considered to not be the right way. So he was concerned that if you label these angels or classify them, that the Catholics would simply worship them. But you can't hide scripture, because what about the seven spirits before the throne? What about the 24 elders? And you hear preachers and pastors talk about the 24 elders, but maybe you've heard it said that they're church leaders or special men that were on the earth, but we don't really know that for sure. And more importantly, that really doesn't make sense in the fact when you understand the fact that there are many classifications of angels. I would say that many classes of creatures that we don't have a clue about, because most of our translations don't take the time to explain to us. But um, as a famous pastor that I listen to often says, that when you get to heaven, you're going to be shocked at how many different angelic or spiritual beings there are besides the disembodied spirits of humans that went to heaven. Let's take you here. What about aliens? Because we think to ourselves that what is an alien? Is it a being from another planet? And, that's what the secular world would say, but it's easy for a Christian to say, well, they're simply demons or fallen angels. Nobody really knows. But again, we hear, well, that can't be true, because why do they come in spaceships? Well, again, you're assuming that in the spirit world, there's no technology. Well, if that's the case, why did a chariot of fire come and pick up Elijah? Couldn't God just transferred him to heaven in an instant? Why technology? See, we have to be honest. We don't understand. We don't know. What we need to know is that if we ever do meet some angels, we need to ask if they're from God or if they're not. That's what you need to know. So again, I'm taking you a little deeper here, and I'm hopefully shocking some of you in a good way. The mark of the beast. It says that once you've taken the mark of the beast, you cannot be saved. I believe that no matter what it is, which none of us know, but I believe it changes your DNA. In other words, to go back to the seed war that we talked about in Genesis 3:15, it changes your seed, and therefore you have corruptible seed, because remember it says in the Bible, by faith you have an incorruptible seed. So by accepting Jesus into your life now, back then your righteousness was by faith, but now you have an incorruptible seed. But if you take the mark of the beast, you can't be saved. Why? Because it's part of the seed war. Now, where do I get that? Let's go back to the days of Noah, back to Genesis 6, right? All flesh was corrupted, even the animals. You want to get crazy? Let's get crazy. Maybe that explains dinosaurs, dragons, because God didn't just wipe out the humans. And I want you to say, well, your first instinct might have been, yeah, but all the animals, Noah went and took two of each animal and put them on the ark. That's not what it says. It actually says that God sent two of each animal, the uncorrupted animals. If the seed was corrupted, including these Bene Elohim doing freaky things with animals, those were also corrupted DNA. Would explain a lot of mythological creatures, the stories that have been handed down for generation after generation of weird or crazy beings. They were altered seeds or altered DNA, which may explain, where did the dinosaurs go? What about the history of dragons? Now, I'm not saying this is for sure, but I'm saying, have you thought of this? Have you considered this? Just to beat the point home, let's take the story of Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, we hear in Daniel that there was this king and he didn't do right. And so Daniel told him, God is going to God is going to curse you. And it says that he actually became a beast who was out in the field eating grass until he got his act right. But was he beastly to begin with? And God turned him over to that DNA. Think about that. Here's another one that probably is going to ruffle some feathers. Let's take the story of Esau. If you're not familiar in the Bible, um, there's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But Jacob was a twin. And actually, he was the second born twin. His firstborn of Isaac was a man named Esau. Now, if you read your scriptures, his people later became the Edomites. And these were vile people. They required sacrifice of children. But why are they not called the Esauites? Why were they called the Edomites? Well, maybe for the same reason that Nimrod became called Gilgamesh. Because it's possible, and I believe biblical, that he was transformed by his worship of other gods. Because if his people were sacrificing to other gods, sacrificing children and otherwise worshiping other gods, he was turned over. So think of this. King Herod was an Edomite, right? And remember when he had all the babies killed trying to get to Jesus? This was part of their practice. And although King Herod was the king of Israel, he was not a Hebrew. He was not from Jacob's line. He was from Esau's line, or he was an Edomite. Now, where do I get this crazy theory? Well, read it. Esau became so beastly and he was so hairy that Jacob was able to trick his father by putting sheepskin on his arms. Now, I'm somebody that I would say with a normal amount of hair on my arms, definitely on the side of less hair than more hair. But genetically, I have some relatives and I definitely have some friends that are pretty hairy guys. I actually have a friend of mine that I met, over the last decade or so that actually has somebody shave his back with a razor because he literally is so hairy that sometimes the hair sticks out above his shirt. And he's actually had people believe that he's wearing a sweater underneath his shirt. But the hair isn't so coarse that a blind human being wouldn't know that it was, wouldn't, they would know that it was another human being. How hairy do you have to be that somebody could put a sheepskin over their arm and a blind person would say, oh, that's Esau? Open your eyes. It's right there in the Bible. The story of Jacob fooling his father with a sheepskin is right there, and we skip right past it. One of my favorite preachers, and definitely took a lot of this content that I'm speaking to you about from Troy Brewer's teaching, but he actually says that Isaac's son must have been a Bigfoot, and we skipped right past it. Esau was so hairy that Jacob fooled his father with a sheepskin on his arm. That sounds like a Bigfoot to me. Another one real quick. King Saul, God gave the people the king they asked for because they wouldn't accept God as their king. But remember, we hear how tall Saul was? Remember, Saul wouldn't kill the Amalekites, who were also Nephalim like him. Now, as I was talking to this young lady, Macy, I became aware of her silence. And maybe some of you are experiencing that same silence as I'm going through this, because it might be opening your eyes to things that you never heard or saw before that are right there in scripture. But she said to me, so what is, at this moment, what is the purpose of God allowing this? And I took her back to the garden and said, well, you remember that the serpent said, you will be like gods, knowing good and evil. Now, Even then, the devil was trying to corrupt mankind as a way to wage war against God because he's a defeated foe. So the battle is waged between the devil and God through the human soul. And I quoted this a few weeks back, and it's something that I stole. But imagine how beautiful a soul is that both God and the devil are fighting over it. So the devil knew all of these things about corrupt DNA. He understood about the angels and how this Bene Elohim class of angel was capable through their physicality of procreating with human women. Remember, he knows how all of this works. And so, because he sat in the court of God and had these discussions with God, that he would understand the plan, right? Think of this. Daniel 2 verse 45 says, "And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay." Who are the they? So Daniel is explaining that these angels are still up to their no good. Let me take you even deeper. Did the men of Sodom and Gomorrah want to assault the angels because of what they look like? And you heard me briefly talk about this in one of the last episodes of season 1, and I think it's safe to assume, and I even brushed past it there because I never thought I would go this deep, but we can assume that it's because of what they look like. Maybe these angels were so attractive that these people wanted to rape them in a public square and were demanding that Lot send these visitors out into the square. But I think it is way more likely that the wanting to have sex with angels was part of their culture. Think about that. Now, do I know this for sure? No, but the Bible starts to make a whole lot more sense as we talk about this. Now, at this point in the conversation, I told Macy to sit back and absorb this passage. And I said, if your father never took the time to talk to you about spiritual beings, you've never heard this before. But this is right there in your Bible. Towards the middle, you will find the book of Psalms. And Psalms 82, verses 1 through 8, are shocking. And I would say that most of you listening has never heard this before. God standeth in the congregation of the mighty. Now, who are the mighty? Who is this congregation? These are angelic spiritual beings. And it says, he judgeth among the gods, among the Elohim. So the Elohim stands in the congregation of the Elohim and judges among the Elohim. How long will ye judge unjustly and accept the persons of the wicked? Selah. Defend the poor and the fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and the needy. Deliver the poor and needy. Rid them out of the hand of the wicked. They know not, neither will they understand. They walk on in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are out of course. I have said, ye are gods, ye are Elohim, and all of you are children of the Most High, the sons of God. You can see where that translation came later on, or back in Genesis chapter 6, the Bene Elohim. But ye shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for thou shalt inherit the nations. So what you have here is, how long will ye judge unjustly? Defend the poor and the fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and the needy. Deliver the poor and needy and rid them out of the hand of the wicked. What you see here is God in the midst of a heavenly court, sitting with the Elohim, scolding them saying, here's what your commission was. You're supposed to defend the poor and the fatherless, do justice for the afflicted and the needy, deliver them from the hands of the wicked. But instead, you chose to be wicked. And therefore, you won't be like the sons of God anymore, the children of God. You shall die like men and fall like one of their princes. And I said to Macy at this time, now do you understand why the demons hate you? Because they are children of these angels who were cursed to not be the children of God anymore. Now, doesn't our Bible tell us that we, when we accept Jesus, become the children of God? So these angels choosing to sin and having these offspring and discuss with them their hatred towards God. Just picture this as they discuss, just like you would with your child, and entice them to wickedness as they participated in wickedness. And the Nephilim, being of a altered seed or an altered DNA, choose wickedness easily. You can see why they became haters of men. And at this point, again, Macy's tears were hard to ignore because I think it began to make sense to her even more than she was able to voice to me at that time. And so to take her out of that, we kind of joked a little bit, and I'll kind of joke with you a little bit. Have you ever thought about why so many people say Bigfoot or cryptids or creatures, skinwalkers, paranormal activity? Could these be corrupted DNA? Could these be beasts that are part of the seed war? Because Bigfoot is a giant and he's hairy, maybe like Esau. Hard to know. I don't know. But let's be honest. We're too worried about what somebody wears to church or what type of Bible they read or whether or not they've been at church every Sunday like you have. We're more worried about that stuff than to actually know what's in our Bible. Now, what I explained to her is that what we need to do is take her to a place that brings her the healing that she's looking for. And so we discussed how seed became corrupted. Because we learned in Genesis 6 that the seed was corrupted through the Bene Elohim and the Nephilim. But what I think we don't understand is how seed became corrupted after the flood. So with Nimrod, aka Gilgamesh, creating this Tower of Babel that God had to destroy because he was able to do these rituals. And remember, keep in mind that in Egypt, we still don't know what the pyramids were for. We were originally told that they were all about, being a tomb for the pharaohs, but they've never found anything that would indicate that's even remotely true. Some scholars think it was a battery, which, when you look at the chemicals and the layout of the pyramid, they could say that it would emit a certain amount of electricity, but that doesn't mean that that wasn't used for rituals. So it still doesn't discount this theory. Now, let me take you deep and dark because this is where Macy began to understand the world that she lives in today and why she has these fears. Because I asked her, why are there so many rumors about kids that are trafficked, that are being ritualistically tortured and abused? Why are there these elite groups of people that are trading children like animals or like commodities? Because these powerful people were promised power, riches, something else. And they believe that you get it from abusing kids. Now go back to the Bible, Molech, Chemosh, these gods that required child sacrifice. These people were participating because they were promised power, just like people are today. And when I said that, I said, do you understand that we're back in the days of Noah? The earth has become the same. And that's when it clicked. The demons were attacking you in your recent history, Macy, because you are a valuable being to God. And I'm sorry that your father was, in all due respect, was an angry Christian who preached hellfire and brimstone and didn't include the grace and the mercy that Jesus so openly and abundantly gave to us, not only through his death, but through his teachings, right? And so, because we're back in the days of Noah, the devil has ramped up his game. He's after people. He wants people. He wants your soul. He wants to take as many of us out as he can because that's his last shot at wounding God for holding him accountable to his own sin, to his own pride. So I told her, this is the crazy thing to me is I get atheists and God haters who mock Christianity and they try to use history. They try to say, well, your Bible's antiquated and blah, 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 blah. But this makes more sense to me as to why there's pyramids all over the world at a time when, according to human history, we weren't even capable of eating with our own hands barely. And now all of a sudden there's these massive stones that we couldn't lift today that are lifted one on top of the other to build these structures. Well, these were built by godlike beings to ritualistically make more godlike hybrid beings in an army against God. And Noah, being of pure genetic blood at that time, was saved. And it's possible that some of his daughter-in-laws had Nephalim blood, and that's how this was perpetuated even after the flood. I can't discount that, but I do know that these ritualistic practices must have occurred. And I know that because they still do. And we hear rumors of these elite people who are drinking children's blood full of adrenaline called adrenochrome. And I think there's more than rumor to that because you can even go back decades ago and find movies that spoke of adrenochrome before any of the QAnon people brought it to our attention. And I'm not endorsing QAnon by any means, but it's more than a myth because we can go back through human history and see that these gods and these people shed the blood of children to obtain favor with these beings and to get what they were looking for from them as well. And so what that did is it took our conversation, and this is where we make this very practical to Macy. Because after we covered those topics, she was able to understand why this battle for her soul was so important. And once we were able to do that, then I was able to kind of get the practicalities of her story, if you will. So what I asked her is, let's just go back and remember the first time you had paranormal activity. And I was very grateful that the deliverance minister that she worked with and his team were able to explain to her that, or at least take her back to a place where she could give me a very good answer. Because she had asked God to bless her, and she asked me not to include what she asked him for, and I will honor her confidentiality with that. But she didn't see the blessing, and she felt angry with God, and that anger came, of course, not only from her anger with God, but from her father, who she didn't feel represented God because he would preach from the pulpit that if you ask God, you shall receive, but she wasn't receiving. And because he was an angry man, God must be angry at her as well. So she cursed God, basically said she hated him. And I've got this often in my ministry. I've screamed at God, I hate you. Does that mean I'm cursed or does that mean that I'm not savable? And the answer to that is no. But what it does do is it's a beacon out in the spirit world that you're a soul that's in danger. or maybe a soul that's weakened or vulnerable. God knows you're angry at him and he knows why you say what you say, and he can forgive even an angry outburst towards him. But what she did is she opened up her soul. And so shortly after, she began to hear voices that were telling her how to get what she wanted. She didn't realize it at the time, but these weren't her own. This wasn't her own voice in her head that was guiding her. Because in hindsight, she can look back and go, if I had the answers before, why wouldn't have I just have done that before? These answers seemed to come out of nowhere in her head. So she started buying self-help books, even disclosing that she was guided to certain self-help books that were driven from a more from a philosophy that wasn't Christianity, we'll put it that way. And it wasn't long after that that objects began to move around her house and wore her down very quickly. To her admission, she basically remembers when she became possessed because she didn't care. She was so distraught and so depressed and so felt like such a failure because she felt that she had turned from God, if God even existed, and that he now was no longer interested in her. And she had made this mistake of pursuing other gods, she said, even with her own words, that now she was going to get what she deserved. So she feels that she became possessed. Fortunately, Macy had an amazing friend, and I won't name that name out of discretion as well, but Macy said that this friend who knew her whole life and had gone away for a while and had come back to their hometown ran into Macy and basically said, "You look like garbage." And that's not the word she used, but that's the word I'll use here. And Macy disclosed to her what she was struggling with. And her friend actually witnessed a set of keys fly off of a hook and land on the table. That was impossible. To come off the hook, first of all, was impossible, but then to land about 20 feet away on a table, they didn't watch it happen, but they heard the keys. They knew where they were and knew where they landed, and nobody was in the house. So her friend said, you know, remember when we were kids and we went to church? Why don't we try that? And her friend admittedly had not been a churchgoer, but still prayed and still believed and still, was trying to live her life right, even though that's not what Christianity is about. That's what she thought it was at the time. So her friend made some phone calls and they found a minister that they knew. And through a series of references and interactions, they found themselves in a church on a night where there was no services, and deliverance was prayed over her, and Macy was set free. Now, what I didn't tell you and what I'll tell you now is that during Macy's anger at God, she had participated in what she would consider some very and I want to use her words, but I also want to use some discretion here. She basically said that she was sexually immoral beyond what she considered even normal. So abnormal sexuality is the term she used, but I didn't want to just say that without some clarification. And so through that process, she felt that that was the final straw where she was possessed. And so her struggles with calling me exist in this. Could I be repossessed? And the reality of this is that you have to understand that the Bible clearly says that deliverance is for a person of faith, because we learned in previous episodes that the Bible says that if a demon is expelled and it leaves and goes to try to find a dry place, but it hates it there, so it comes back to the house. And if the house is empty, even though it's tidied up and swept, but it's empty, it's going to bring seven more worse than itself. But a person of faith can still have demonic attachments, but living your faith and living according to God's desire for your life and letting the Holy Spirit drive your interactions, that space where demons want to occupy is now full. So I told her, sure, you can get more attachments, but more importantly, what you're doing by living in fear is opening the door for that. So after explaining all of that theology to her, what we were able to do is take her to a place where we said, but remember back when the incarnate Jesus in the garden told the serpent, I will crush your head. I said, that serpent was trampled on Calvary. And Jesus died for her sins, for your sins, Macy, on that cross 2,000 years before you were even born, past, present, and future. He endured that horrific death, that agonizing death beyond our human comprehension for you, for me, for each and every one of us to conquer sin, sickness, and death. Not just that day, but past, present, and future. And so living according to the truth, remember, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The truth is that you're forgiven. The truth is that you now have an incorruptible seed. And so when you have fears and you have doubts and you have negative emotions that would all be avenues or doors that you can open for more demonic attachments, you give those to God. You talk to him about your depression. You talk to him about your anxieties. You talk to him about your sin, your lust, your desires, because he's big enough to handle those. Remember, God knows what you're doing. We so often get deceived that we can do things in the dark and God doesn't see them. Well, maybe nobody else saw him, but God did. But he also knows you struggle. He also knows the temptations and the brokenness that you have. And so communicate to him. And maybe some of you have never thought of that. What if you went to God and said, I struggle with lust. I struggle with pornography. I struggle with anger. I struggle with jealousy. Teach me how to rid myself of that, how to shed those attachments, those spirits that are trying to get in at deeper and deeper levels. He's got answers for him in the scriptures, but more importantly, our relationship with God as it grows, those scriptures come alive, but more importantly, the word of God speaks to you, not just through the Bible, but to you directly. And so I think our conversation with Macy has concluded with this. She's relieved. She had some suspicions of some of the things that I was going to say, but just maybe wanted some reassurance. And again, the deliverance minister that worked with her was amazing. And I can't, give credit because God's a true deliverer, but I give credit where credit's due in terms of him being a good disciple of Jesus and therefore discipling her accordingly. But what I can say is that Macy has some assurances now. I want to close with this, and I'm just going to speak a little bit about my second book. And for those of you that are new, I have a book series called the Struggle Series. There's volumes 1 and 2 are out at bookstores. We're working on volume 3, which is called The Return. But volume 2 or book 2 is called The Sacrifice. And the story of The Sacrifice is about a young couple who moves into a home and finds out they're under massive demonic attack. And without ruining the story, through the deliverance process, many deep, dark secrets come out. But the resolution of the story comes out when the truth comes out. And it's always funny to me that we try so hard to keep our secrets, and the only solution is for them to come out. The only deliverance you experience is when you confess it all, when you put it all on the table, because then it loses its steam. The doors close because the secrets are what was opening the doors to the spirits. But in this story, the secrets were what was keeping the demons around through this story. And we do that so much in our lives. But God knows. Take it to him. Take it to some friends that you trust. Build a group of friends that you know their secrets and they know yours. People that you can trust. I know that churches are hard, and I know that if you walked into a church and said, "Hey, it's my first day, but I want to meet a group of women and tell you all my deep dark secrets," they would look at you like a weirdo. I get that. But what's the alternative? Keep the secrets to yourself and the demons have access to your life. Put them out there. And the resolution in my book, The Sacrifice, comes from a full, not only disclosure of the secrets, but repentance as well. But putting it out there took the steam away, if you will. And so that is called grace. Whatever you've done, God's grace is sufficient. The Bible says that wherever grace abounds, sin, actually the word is hooper, which we get the word super from. So in the actual language, it says where grace abounds, or where sin abounds, grace superabounds, more abundantly abounds, way bigger than the sin. And it doesn't mean that we should sin so we get grace. But what it means is when you receive grace, knowing that you sinned, you really want a relationship with that type of a God, with that Jesus who would forgive you when you're not forgivable, when the world would deem you as unlovable. And so my conversation with Macy ended like this: God loves you. You are not unlovable. You are not your past. You are a child of God. You are a new creation in Him. And when you get to heaven, He is going to tell you, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." Not because you were the super Christian like a lot of preachers preach, that, if we're honest, preachers come across as, if you get to be as good as me, when I get to heaven, He's going to tell me that. And so if you do as good as me, you'll get that same response from God. But "well done, my good and faithful servant" means that you came to the end of yourself and you realize that the only way to get there is through Jesus. That's well done, because He understands what you had to fight through to make that decision to accept that grace and stop living the lie that the devil told at the very beginning in the garden. God was enough then, they didn't need the fruit, and He's enough now. Give your life to Him. And so my conversation with Macy was amazing. She changed me. She altered me because she was so vulnerable and such a beautiful soul that it took me out of my paradigm and allowed me to give all this theology that I so wanted to shy away from. But what she did in me is say, if she needs to hear this, maybe some of you do. Now, I know that some of you will be challenged with this theology, and I'm not going to shy away from it. Anthony at thestruggleseries.com. Email me, and our team will get that to me. We will give you the answers that you need, the scriptures that you need, or if you want to challenge me a little bit. I don't know how much time I have to get in a theological debate with you, but I'll at least try to entertain what you're asking, because this is important. We are in the days of Noah, people. 40 years ago, we had different problems. We're in the end times in my belief system. And evil can't continue to run rampant like it is now. God had to intervene then, and He's going to have to intervene soon. And that's why you see such an uptick in paranormal activity and demonic attack on people. Even the Catholic Church will admit that they've had to train exponentially more exorcists all over the world because there's so much more need at this time. Why is that? Because in the days of Noah, evil run rampant and God has to intervene. What we want to do is accept His grace, push the evil out of our lives, the demons out of our lives, and become children of God, which can be a light to other people. And that's what we try to do here on the Freedom from the Struggle podcast in this ministry, as well as, help guide you to other people who can be a help. This media of helping people this way is always an explored territory, which is why I've chosen to do this at this time. It's maybe an avenue or a source of this kind of information that you wouldn't get somewhere else. Maybe you wouldn't want to wander into a church, but you'll listen to a crazy podcaster who's rambling on about theology that you've never heard, or maybe that other people would consider insane, but you entertain it, and you'll go to these scriptures I gave you, and you'll Google search, and you'll read different translations, and you'll find the answers that you need. And if you are struggling with the demonic, if we can help you, we will do our best to get you to the people that can help you. I have some resources available. There's a great ministry who has actually put together a map of people that offer deliverance in different parts of the country and different parts of the world. And we would be more than happy to get that information to you. And once I gain permission to do that, I'll actually start putting it in the show notes and stuff. I simply haven't done that, but I want to get permission that we can use that information as we need it. So, but I can definitely get you that. If you need it, just reach out to me. I want to thank you again for joining us on the Freedom from the Struggle podcast. Remember, we're still small, we're still trying to grow. So share this podcast with your friends. If you like it, please leave us a review. Those always help us. If you want to subscribe, hit like, hit the notification button to get notifications every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Central Time. Here in America, we will put out a new episode unless the world is ending. I'm going to try to do every Wednesday, or at least keep you apprised if for some reason we can't. If you are so inclined, we also do some bonus episodes on Patreon. At a $2 level, you can simply help us by just contributing $2, and it'll get you a shout out on the air, as well as get you, the old catalog, which you can find there, as well as your podcatcher. But at the $5 level, we do 2 bonus episodes a month where we break down kind of well-known paranormal stories and put them in the context of how deliverance ministry could have been a better source of help than what these people actually received. Right now, so far, there are a couple bonus episodes on there that might be interesting to you. We covered the Sally House as well as the Amityville Horror House, and we'll put out another episode at the end of actually this week. And you can check out that bonus content by going to patreon.com/freedom from the struggle. Again, thanks for joining us. May God bless you and keep you. And let me just say a quick prayer as we walk away. Father God, anybody struggling with the demonic, just make yourself evident to them. And we command the demons in the name of Jesus that you give a reprieve. You are demanded and commanded by the blood of Jesus Christ that you give them the reprieve. They will find the help they need and find the deliverance they need, and you can't stop it. So, Jesus, I pray that you would guide those people to the right places, to the right people, to the right scriptures. Use your Holy Spirit in the mighty way that you always do to find the people that are lost and lead them back to your flock. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Hello, and thank you for sticking around for this important announcement on some bonus content that's coming up this Friday. I want to let all the listeners know that there is a Patreon campaign associated with this podcast. And on that campaign, there are 2 levels. The $2 level per month gets you a shout out on the air. So we'll put your name on the air to thank you for your contribution. And that $2 a month helps us basically just to keep the podcast on the air and keep the equipment up to date, so on and so forth. But you also become a partner as we try to help those with their struggle. Now, the $5 per month donation allows you to get access to some bonus content. And so twice a month, we put out an episode that breaks down a well-known possession case, or sometimes a lesser known possession case. We break it down in terms of how deliverance ministry would have been a better intervention. So in order to give our regular listeners a taste of that bonus content, I wanted to let you know that this Friday, the 19th at 6 p.m., we'll be broadcasting one of those bonus episodes on the Sally House. So be looking out for that. And if that's something that you like and you would like to access some more content, please feel free to look at our Patreon campaign, which is at Patreon/freedom from the struggle. If not, enjoy the bonus content and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you so much for tuning in, and many blessings.